There hasn't been a more controversial NFL player over the last 6 years than Colin Kaepernick. He had his moments with the 49ers, but after he began kneeling for the National Anthem in 2016, he hasn't been back in the pros. There's a lot more to it, but it all boils down to one question: should Colin Kaepernick be in the league? The 49ers traded up at the 2011 NFL Draft to take Kaepernick. His rookie year, he didn't really see the field at all, backing up Alex Smith. Then the next year, Smith got off to a roll. He led the league with a 70% completion percentage, was third in passer rating, and San Francisco was 6-2, and then everything hit the fan. Smith went down with a concussion, causing Kaepernick to have to step in, and all of a sudden, he hit a groove. Teams just couldn't figure out how to deal with his athleticism and arm, and he ended up going 11-4-1. Kaepernick was hot, and by the time Smith was ready to go, Kaepernick got to keep the job. Come on, I mean, every coach knows you ride the hot hand. And it ended up working out in the playoffs too. Kaepernick even broke the NFL record for rushing yards in a game by a quarterback with 181 in the divisional round. His 4 touchdowns led the 49ers to a win. Then, in the NFC Championship, San Francisco barely beat the Falcons. In the Super Bowl, which was known as the Harbaugh Bowl, the battle between John and Jim Harbaugh, things didn't go the 49ers' way. Their defense just couldn't stop Joe Flacco even if their lives depended on it. And while the 49ers did try to rally back, it was just too late. And unfortunately, that was the peak of Kaepernick's career. San Francisco returned to the playoffs the following season on the back of Kaepernick, who passed for 3,100 yards and 21 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. In the postseason, the 49ers got through the Packers and Panthers to set up an NFC Championship game against the Seahawks, the game that, in a way, symbolizes the fall of Kaepernick's career. The 49ers lost, and a lot of the blame fell on the back of Kaepernick, and for good reason. In San Francisco's last 3 drives, Kaepernick fumbled, threw an interception, and for good measure, threw another interception. The iconic Richard Sherman tip drill that was followed with his famous rant.
When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're gonna get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Everything just went poor from there on out. The staple of those successful 49ers teams was the defense, and once Navarro Bowman and Patrick Willis jumped ship, the team declined a good bit, and it didn't help that Jim Harbaugh left for Michigan. To put it simple, Kaepernick sucked in 2015 and eventually got benched in favor of Blaine Gabbert. Not exactly a good thing when you're getting benched for Blaine Gabbert. Kaepernick expressed that he wanted to be traded and ended up having to undergo shoulder surgery. Now, the famous and chaotic 2016 season. It started with a lot of questions. Kaepernick was coming off of 3 injuries and had lost his starting job the season prior. Chip Kelly was the new head coach and named Gabbert the starter. Then, well, this is what happens when you have quarterbacks that just aren't good, period. Gabbert was benched for Kaepernick, but then Kaepernick was benched for Gabbert, and then once again, Gabbert was benched for Kaepernick. After his first 2 seasons in the pros, Kaepernick only averaged 13.7 passing touchdowns and 1.3 rushing touchdowns to 6.3 interceptions over the remainder of his tenure in San Francisco. The question of whether or not Kaepernick was blackballed out of the league is a big one that has come up. And let's be real, I think we can all say that he kind of was, but we'll get to that later. At the very least, it doesn't have much to do with him leaving the 49ers. It was unsure whether or not he was even going to be in San Francisco in 2016, and then after Chip Kelly was fired after a single disastrous year, Kyle Shanahan took over and said Kaepernick didn't fit his scheme. Besides, Kaepernick is the one that opted out of his deal. Of course, we need to rewind a bit to see what else occurred during the 2016 season. During the 49ers' 3rd preseason game, instead of standing for the National Anthem, Kaepernick sat instead, not wanting to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people. One of the things that I do think gets lost is that after Kaepernick was told that sitting was disrespectful to the military, he opted to kneel instead to show more respect to the armed forces. The 49ers and the NFL put out a statement after that Kaepernick didn't have to stand. That was a big part of this, especially if it came to court in a blackball case. This isn't a First Amendment issue like some might like to think. I can't protest at my job when I'm getting paid by somebody. That's what the amendment is. But the team and the league that employed Kaepernick said it was okay. So, no, Kaepernick in no way did anything wrong. We all know that Kaepernick recently worked out for the Raiders, and it sounds like it went pretty well. There's been a couple of times he's worked out in some capacity. The Seahawks brought him in for a visit in 2017, and then in 2019, the NFL set up a workout for him, but he instead moved it to a high school because he didn't like the fact that there wasn't any media allowed there, which was interesting. In fairness, I want to take the stance looking at the positive and the negative with Colin Kaepernick. No, Kaepernick isn't a starter, and honestly, he wasn't going to be a starter post-2016 whether or not he knelt for the National Anthem or not. That being said, there's no way that he shouldn't have a backup quarterback job at the very least. Kaepernick played in a Super Bowl and was considered a veteran quarterback. He could have helped a young guy, especially a mobile quarterback, learn the ropes in the pros. Anyone that isn't biased, and let's be honest, it seems like almost everyone is in some way, would very clearly admit that Kaepernick was still plenty good enough to be a backup quarterback. In fact, in my opinion, I think he's probably still better, or at least more valuable than a handful of backups in the league today. At the end of the day, we're talking about a league that gave Kareem Hunt another chance after kicking a young woman on the ground, employed Michael Vick after his famous dogfighting ring, and oh yeah, just gave Deshaun 22 sexual assault allegations, Watson a record-breaking $230 million. It seems like according to the NFL, you can do anything wrong, and as long as you're talented enough, the NFL will still employ you. The question is whether or not Colin Kaepernick was good enough. Now again, anyone that looks at this situation from an unbiased standpoint will admit that Kaepernick, well, wasn't any good in his last few years in the league. In fact, his 49.5 QBR in 2016 was the same as the one and only quarterback Brock Osweiler, who despite being in the first year of a $72 million deal, was released after a cap relief trade. There were also already a lot of questions surrounding Kaepernick. He was faced with the same criticisms as Mark Sanchez was during his career. Both were behind legendary good defenses, and the question was always if they were just being carried. And much like Sanchez, when the defense disappeared, Kaepernick was just really bad. The Colin Kaepernick debate between people on the internet has been non-stop for the past 5 years. And you know what? Both sides have some good points. Yes, Kaepernick might still have what it takes to be an NFL quarterback, but at the same time, he wasn't great last time we saw him and hasn't played in years. If Kaepernick can get a job, we finally get to see who is right. And let me say, if Kaepernick can still spin it, that'd be one hell of a feat. Being a quarterback is hard. It's all about repetition and rhythm. So it'd be hard to come back after so many seasons off. There's also the realistic possibility that Kaepernick gets signed and we just never hear about him. Especially if he went to Las Vegas, we're talking about a backup, nothing more. Derek Carr is a top 15 quarterback in the league and just signed a $120 million extension. It's no secret that he's their guy. It sounds like a realistic possibility Kaepernick makes his return to the NFL, but don't expect him to see the field.